Fachie, welcome to the Dent podcast.
Yeah, thanks for finally having me on. It's a real privilege to be part of it.
It is so great having you on the Key Person of Influence program. You are not like most of the people on our program who are traditional entrepreneurs starting and growing businesses. You're an athlete. Tell us a little bit about your day job. What does a typical week involve for you?
Yeah, so I'm still a full-time cyclist. I've been a full-time athlete for over a decade. So that involves 6 days a week training. I do get a day off every week, but that's at least one or two training sessions a day, and really that kind of lifestyle of a full-time athlete, where if you're not training, you're getting your body in the right space, your head in the right space, so that come the next training session, you're able to kind of give it your all as well. So as you say, coming into KPI was really interesting for me, because I come in as a key person in my sporting world, but trying to enter into the business world, I'm a nobody really. So it's been an interesting journey, and yeah, it's been really exciting to kind of see those contrasts between sport and business as well, which is something I really enjoy looking at.
I've just read your book, and it's wonderful the way that you parallel the key learnings that you've had from the world of sport, and you translate them to learnings that anyone could learn if they're an entrepreneur, an executive, a leader, the head of a charity, anyone who's kind of demanding a lot from themselves and pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. There are great lessons and great analogies in there. Before we get into that, tell me about some of your sporting highlights. Tell me about what it's like to be in Rio or to be in London. Some of those places where you've had the high points.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I'm going to take you back to before my cycling career, and it was when I used to do athletics. I was a runner, 1 and 200 meters, and that was very much my hobby growing up, was athletics. I loved that, the freedom, the exhilaration of just going as fast as you can. It's so simple, but just a wonderful thing that got cleared my head outside of school, outside of university. Just being able to go and do that was immense. And ultimately, I'm someone with a visual impairment. I was diagnosed at the age of 4, and it's a congenital condition that degenerates over time. And when I was young, I never really considered my eyesight was bad enough to be eligible as a disabled athlete. You don't know what other people have. You only kind of know what you've got. So I kind of always thought my eyesight was similar to what others could see. But as it got gradually worse, someone suggested to me that I should consider the Paralympics, and it was only in my early 20s that I was decided to go and kind of get the eye test that confirmed I could have always been competing. I'm someone with a visual impairment that is certainly bad enough to be considered a Paralympian. And so my hobby became a kind of full-time career at that point. I switched into being on the development squad for GB, and I guess my biggest sporting achievement was that I made it to the Beijing Paralympics in 2008. And I was essentially the last man on the squad. I just qualified by the skin of my teeth. But
which competition?
Yeah, so that was the 1 and 200 meters in Beijing. And so, yeah, 2008. So we're talking 12 years ago. And, I made it. I was a Paralympian. And that's when I fell in love with the Paralympics as well. Up until that point, I don't think a lot of the world knew much about the Paralympics. I think the Sydney Games and back in 2000 kind of opened a few eyes, but it wasn't big. But it became very aware when I entered the athletes' village in Beijing, which is where all the athletes stay during a games. Just the magnitude of it all, diversity as well. So I walked in, and there are people from all across the globe, all with different disabilities. It's just the most diverse place on earth. It's absolutely incredible. And, I instantly fell in love with that. And then the venues as well. I was racing in a 90,000 seater stadium.
Wow.
Coming from racing in like local club events initially, it's just immense. So I fell in love with the Paralympic Games, and that was it. I knew that the London Games were 4 years away, and you've mentioned those already, and that became this huge target that I had to be there. I had to be part of that. And out in Beijing, I finished 9th in both my events, the 1 and 200 meters, top 8 making the final. So it was okay. It was a decent performance. Top 10 in the world is not bad, but I knew that if I wanted to make it to London, home Paralympic Games, then I had to really push on to the next level. And I came back ready to commit, ready to go for it. And I got a phone call just 2 weeks later from my manager at UK Athletics. And she said, "We don't think you've got the potential to make it to
Oh,
London.
wow.
We're terminating your contract with immediate effect." And that's it. The dream was over. So I'd gone from my absolute sporting high moment
Being
to
in a stadium of 90,000 people, that getting a taste for your passion, what you love, and probably wandering around thinking, this is me, this is what I want to commit to. No sooner do you get back and you get that phone call, that must have been crushing.
yeah. And yeah, I'd love to say I'm someone who bounced back, but I don't think anyone really bounces back from those things straight away. And it was almost like a grieving process, really. I was kind of grieving the loss of my dream almost. So initially I was blaming everyone else. It was their fault that I didn't perform. You know, they weren't getting the best out of me. And it took a while to kind of go through that phase and then into kind of a depression phase as well, to be honest, where it was just that numbness and not really feeling anything. But that spark of London 2012 being 4 years away was huge for me. And although I spent a couple of months feeling sorry for myself, for some reason, one morning I woke up and that kind of numbness disappeared and that spark came through again. And I thought, you know, you can't just sit back and watch the London Games on TV. That's going to be heartbreaking. You know, you want to be part of it. I thought that would just be kind of the end of me, to be honest. And so you might as well give it one last crack. And I decided to research every sport for visually impaired people at the London Games, and decided I was going to try every single one until I found one I might just be good enough at that I possibly have a chance of making it to a start line or onto a field of play at the London Games. And that became my goal. And, you know, I've been a lifelong fan of cycling. So I decided, I mean, they'd had a really successful games in Beijing as well. The GB cycling team won absolutely everything. So they're in the news. They were the team to be part of. And I decided that's where I'm going to go first and give it a go. But as you know, Dan, I'm not always the most self-confident, outgoing guy by any means. So I didn't want to just turn up at GB Cycling and say, "Hey, can I be part of your team?" I didn't really feel worthy of that, so I felt like I had to get into the sport myself first. So I called up the velodrome, the National Cycling Centre in Manchester, and said, "How do you have a go in the velodrome?" And they said, "Well, we have these things called taster sessions where anyone from the public can come along and give it a try." And I said, "Yeah, okay, sign me up." And I got off the phone and realized I hadn't told them I can't see very well. And I thought, yeah, maybe I should have told them, but they might not give you a shot.
A little detail.
So, yeah, I thought, no, let's just let it slide. I'll be okay. And I turned up at the venue. It was a 7-hour train journey from where I stayed in Aberdeen. So I made a big commitment to go there. And I wobbled my way around the track, and you know, I made it around. I stayed well away from everyone else. I didn't want to crash into anyone or anything. But I did the session, and that was that. I was ready to go home. I had a shot of cycling and didn't really know what the next step was.
I'm curious, at that point, how well can you see?
Yeah, so I mean, my vision's slightly worse now than it was then, but still, it's my central vision is useful, but it's quite blurry. So, for instance, I can see big objects from quite far away, like a bus coming down the road from 100 meters away. I can see the shape of it, but until the bus is at the stop, I can't actually read like what number or what destination. So there's no real clarity there. And I've also got a loss of peripheral vision. So like when I'm out walking, I'm forever walking into low-level objects and things. So it's not ideal for riding a bike, if I'm honest.
Yeah, especially if there's other people around. So you obviously, you didn't tell them that, but you had the experience of riding around the velodrome. And I mean, even that is a lesson of just literally, you know, giving something a try, traveling 7 hours to be there. And were you, out of curiosity, were you working at that point? Were you, like, what were you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I was applying for jobs at that point because I had no income at all, but I couldn't get any work. And it seemed to be, I think things have perhaps improved, but you know, talking about the fact I had a visual impairment seemed to be fighting against me getting jobs as well. I felt I had a degree in physics, so I felt like I seemed like someone who, you know, been to the Paralympic Games, degree in physics. Maybe I've got something to offer quite a lot of organizations, but I just couldn't get a job. So I was signing on at the job center and spending most of my day just playing video games to kind of kill the time and kill my mind from thinking about the real world. So I was at an absolute low point at that point in time, where I had no future, to be honest. I couldn't really see. I thought I was going to be living on benefits for the rest of my life, which
Wow.
not a kind of a world I ever wanted to be part of. I always have been someone who strives to
Knowing
get the
you
most
now
out of
and knowing
themselves.
how committed you are to high performance, that must have been just, I mean, just so against who you are, the fundamentals of who you are. So you've carried yourself down 7 hours, you've gone around the velodrome, and did you know at that time that was it? You wanted to be part of that team?
Um, I knew I loved the sport from that ride around. I mean, again, that sense of freedom and speed that I got from athletics and running. You can go much quicker on a bike. So, even just riding slowly around, I got that freedom and love straight away. But there was no clear step from there as to how I would go about progressing. But living on my past glories from the games, I had a bag with me that had Beijing 2008 on the back, the Paralympic Games logos all over it. And a guy noticed my bag and kind of was asking me about it. And he happened to mention he was just getting ready for a Great Britain cycling session. It was on after us. He told me about his experience. He'd been to the Olympics and won a silver medal in Sydney, and he now just shifted over from the Olympic squad to the Paralympic squad, and was what is known as a pilot, someone who rides on the front of a tandem. And he needed a visually impaired rider to go on the back of the bike. And he
You
asked me, "Yeah,
serious?
do you know anyone?"
The first time you arrive and Paul McCartney meets John Lennon. What a moment.
Yeah, just mind blowing. And
People say, isn't it funny? People talk about their like success having to follow a formula, and often the thing that no one wants to acknowledge is this role of luck. The fact that you get these lucky breaks, but you never get the lucky breaks if you don't show up. So
exactly.
if you don't turn up, then you've got to put yourself out there and not know what's going to happen, and then suddenly something happens. So it's mind blowing that the first time that you go to the velodrome, there's a silver Olympic medalist looking for someone to get into the sport.
Yeah, and you kind of allude to there about luck, and the key thing was, I mean, I was such a shy person. I was lacking self-confidence, and particularly at that point,
Yeah.
when I'm at my lowest ebb, to be honest. So even picking up the phone to call the velodrome was very out of my character. I get very nervous about phone calls, and you might remember that from when I've spoken to you on the phone, Dan. That it's just these silly things that I really don't like it. Just that kind of interaction. So I kind of pushed myself out of my normal way of being, kind of disrupted my normal way of thinking. And then to make that journey, like 7 hours on the train and stay over down in Manchester, it was just so out of my character. But the instant I did that and stepped out and kind of got out my own way, then suddenly this
The stars
opportunity was
aligned.
just there. Yeah, just on a
So
plate for me.
did you jump straight on the bike? Did that literally just unfold that day?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't quite a case of just that was it. He introduced me to the right people, and we got chatting about potential trial days and things. But it was a slightly slow process. But he got me a bike to train on that I could set up on a static trainer at home, and he sent me through training sessions, and it just fast tracked me into that world and knowing what I needed to do in order to improve. But it was that was in October in 2008 that I went down for that day, and it wasn't till I think March 2009 before a trial actually happened with the team. So it was quite a long period, and it was hard to have that motivation because I didn't know what was happening, whether it was a realistic goal or not. I didn't know how good I was. I might turn up to a trial day and I was terrible, and that was it. I'd have to move on to the next sport, and I'd have lost months in that time. But I put the work in and got a bit better, and that trial day went incredibly well, where they saw some potential. And I decided at that point that I needed to, if I wanted to really go for it, and I felt like this was my last chance, that I needed to move to Manchester to be around the cycling team with all their experts, with all the training going on in the velodrome there. And they gave me £1,000 for my year to join the development squad with the British Cycling. And that was pretty much all the money I had, bar a little bit of savings and a bit of help from mum and dad. And I decided to move to Manchester and rent a flat, and essentially had about 6 months where I could survive financially before I'd be absolutely done and have to go back crawling home to ask for help and be allowed to move back in. So I moved down there and just committed and thought, this is your one chance. You need to give it your all. And that motivation of, it's almost a ticking time bomb till I had to move back home was so immensely powerful that it just allowed me to kind of push myself to absolute ridiculous limits to convert from being a runner to a cyclist in a short period of time. And it ultimately led to, in 2009, the first World Championships came about, and they were in Manchester as well. And there was an opportunity for a visually impaired rider to qualify, because the guy who was the Paralympic champion, also from the UK, had decided to take a year out, and it kind of was an open door, really, that there was this chance for someone. And there were two of us vying for the position, but I fought hard and I got that place. And I was developing at such an incredible rate because I was new to something. I was just finding these performance gains almost day in, day out. And as we approached with a couple of weeks to these World Championships, which took place at the end of the year in November, suddenly I became aware that we could be quite competitive. And then on the day itself, it was the 1 kilometer time trial, which is 4 laps of the velodrome that I did. And, we raced, and I had no idea what to expect. I hadn't raced before. I'd done a small trial event, but not really raced internationally. And I come around to complete the race and hear the announcer say the new world record.
Wow.
And my mind was absolutely blown. Like, how is this possible? I couldn't really compute. But that weekend, we took 2 golds, broke 2 world records. And I'd gone in the space of just over a year from job center to top of the podium. And it was absolutely mind-blowing. And obviously ultimately meant I didn't have to move back in with mom and dad, which was the main goal. But yeah, just incredible. And I just couldn't compute how that turnaround could happen. But
when athletes say things like, I was really pushing myself hard, and I had this deadline and I had to push myself hard, what does that actually mean? What is like, for a layperson, for someone who's not in sport, what does it mean to push yourself hard?
There's definitely a level of performance that the vast majority of people have no idea they can access, and it becomes very much a mental game. And you often hear people.
Do you mean training long days, putting in extra long time, or do you mean pushing yourself hard every single lap, or what does it?
Yeah,
what does it mean?
So it's not strictly a case of, and particularly as a sprinter, it's not always more time that necessarily makes you quicker. It's the quality of training and being able to access speed and force through your legs in a very cycling specific manner that you otherwise couldn't. So it was a case of, when I had these training sessions, and they might only be an hour and a half in the gym in the morning, and we'd have 3-hour track sessions in the afternoon, but a lot of that time was spent sitting down between efforts. And the idea was, when you're doing those efforts, it's just literally everything you could possibly give. So you finish those efforts and your body just wants to give up. It wants to, the amount of times, particularly when I switched sports, where I was physically vomiting after every single effort I did.
Wow.
Because I'd accessed this part of my body that wasn't used to being pushed that hard. And that was very much a mental battle, and something that you do often hear people say at the absolute elite level of sport, it's no longer really a physical battle anymore. It is mental. And it's very much about who can access that extra area. That your brain is constantly telling you, the survival part of your brain, that you need to stop. You need to stop doing this. You're killing yourself. This is bad. And that just is playing games with you the whole time, trying to convince you why you should stop and why you don't really need to push this hard. And then it's finding that way to override that.
What's your way? What's your way of overriding that?
Yeah. And there's a few techniques to that.
Isn't it strange that we talk about it like you've got 2 brains. You've got one brain telling you to stop, and the other brain saying, no, we absolutely have to keep going. It's it's a strange phenomenon.
Absolutely. And that inner battle that I'm sure people have, not just in the sport, regardless of what you're doing, about whether or not you should be doing things. And the unfortunate thing with sport is that, and it's the case with whatever you're doing, that there are often parts of the journey that you don't enjoy. So I love racing. I love competing. I love to win, obviously. And, I love to to push myself and make improvements. But there are parts of training I really hate, if I'm honest. And you get up in the morning and look at your training program some days and just think, oh God, I cannot face doing this. But those who succeed are those who still manage to find a way to perform.
What's your way? How do you push through?
The first and foremost is having an absolute end goal in mind that you can call upon that's going to motivate you. So back in that initial period, it was that almost that 6-month period that I had. It was this ticking clock that I had to make the improvements or I wasn't going to make it. It then became London 2012. That was my go-to phrase constantly. When I was in a tough training session, again, battling internally with myself, I just kind of keep reminding myself, London 2012, and it would just kind of be enough to edge me in the other way so that I push my body to the limit.
One thing I love in your book, one thing I absolutely love is a very, very practical tip that you have, which is a 3-word motivator. And like London 2012 kind of fits. But you know, the book is called Earn Your Stripes, which became, you know, if you read the book, it became your mantra of Earn Your Stripes, and that had a lot of meaning for you. And I love this idea that a 3-word motivator is such a powerful thing. So for that period of time between 2009 to 2012, you just would, when things were tough, you would actually say to yourself, is that right? You'd say London 2012?
And that would be both internally and sometimes externally, you know, when you really need to almost shout at yourself to break through that barrier. But yeah, it's this thought that I had this realization that so many companies use this idea of the power of 3. So the fact that 3 words is something that sticks in your head, and, you know,
the most famous of which being just do it.
Exactly. And, you know, it's just, there's a number of these, and so many companies use it as marketing tools because they stick in our head. We love things in 3s. We like stories with a beginning, a middle, an end. You know, even the podium's got 3 places on it. It's just this number that keeps popping up all the time. And I just became aware that when I needed these things. I mean, I used to have one when I was in athletics, that I was training in the cold weather and I'd say, oh, this is the kind of sessions that makes world champions. And I'd tell myself that, but it never seemed very catchy. But suddenly I kind of picked up on this London 2012 thing, and it was so motivational, so powerful, that I decided after London 2012, I needed to use this, having this 3-word saying, because it just was so effective in these training sessions. So in cycling, when you become a world champion, along with a gold medal, you win a jersey, which has 5 stripes across it, which is known as the rainbow stripes. And that's a jersey you wear for the next year until the next competition. So you're instantly recognizable as a world champion. And so every year I'd be trying to win those rainbow stripes. So earn your stripes became kind of my go-to phrase. And it was something that reminded me about why I was doing it. And ultimately my bigger goal, which we were speaking earlier about how you overcome those barriers. And, you know, winning's a great motivator to have, but the problem comes when you actually get to the top and win. What happens then? You know, what happens is the next guy who wants to win comes along and wins instead, and you don't win anymore.
Do it again.
Yeah, exactly. You need something more, right? So that's when I started to realize that my real motivation wasn't just to win, but it was to show what people with a disability are capable of. So my goal became trying to make sure that the para sport was at least on a par with Olympic sport, if not quicker. And that became my goal. And saying earn your stripes reminded me every year that I needed to win the world title. And it kind of also just brought me back to this bigger goal. So anytime, again, I was struggling in training to lift the weight, I'd just say that to myself, come on, earn your stripes. And bang, you know, that part of my brain that was kind of convincing me like, you could go easy today, you know, one day easy, it's not going to make a big difference.
Wow.
It's just playing those tricks on you. And then just that phrase, bang, that was it, done.
Do you feel that anyone who is trying to achieve anything, whether it be a business goal or maybe just even a personal fitness achievement or just anything that's hard, pushing through a barrier, that they should really consciously create a 3-word motivator and have that available to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a simple thing. And, you know, as long as it is aligned to that big end goal that you've got, then I think it is just immensely powerful. And truth be told, I don't think I'd had half or even even 3/4 of the success that I've had over the years without having those phrases in my mind. And, I've spoken to other athletes as well who have used similar techniques, and maybe not always as catchy as my 3-word approach, but they've always got that something they can call upon. And I think that applies regardless of what you're doing. I mean, as I say, there are days when you just don't fancy it, but if you want to be a world leader in whatever industry or whatever field, whatever it might be you're doing, you're going to have to deliver. So something as simple
It's
as
almost like it's almost like just a way of just zooming right in on that point of success that you're aiming for. That's more important than the little tiny point of failure that you've got in front of you right this moment. So it's just that very fast refocus. And I suppose all you need is the awareness to just refocus on what you want rather than the thing that's frustrating. Is there any other area that you've used these three-word motivators in life?
Yeah, I mean, so I was always quite, as I said, quite self-conscious about myself and my disability, and I hid my disability when I was younger, so I didn't tell anyone about it. And I was almost, I guess, from that generation where you didn't tell people what your problems were, and you were just tough and you just got on with it, which is great, but it doesn't get you very far, sadly. And so yeah, I'd often hide my disability, and I was almost ashamed of it. But I started using a white cane, partly because I needed to when I was walking around, just so I would stop walking into objects or into people. I mean, the thing about other people is they're a lot less predictable than lampposts are generally. So they're kind of, coming in and out my peripheral vision. And if you walk into someone, then not many people take too kindly to it. But if you're using a white cane, for instance, they realize that, oh, okay, there's something wrong. There's a reason why you bumped into me. But I don't know, whenever I walk into anything, I often get really embarrassed with myself, and it kind of affects my confidence for the rest of the day. And this happened for many years. So even my training would be affected because I'd walked into like a bollard or something walking down the street, and just my confidence would be knocked. I'd feel so stupid and get angry with myself. And then I started to realize this was a really silly belief to have. Like, I spoke to other people, and you get that perspective where others are saying, well, of course you walk into things, you're visually impaired. I walk into things and I can see fine. And I got that other perspective of it. And I decided to, well, this 3-word phrase has worked so well for me in sport. Why don't I put it into practice here? And that's something I started to do. So whenever I walked into something, I'd literally just say, you're visually impaired. And it'd just be that reminder, like, oh, right, of course, I don't need to be ashamed. I don't need to be embarrassed. And I could start laughing at myself, actually, that I'd occasionally bump into something and I could just, almost brush it off. It was this limiting belief. It just popped in my head all the time and was kind of eating me up. But just simply switching the focus to, yeah, it's fine. You're visually impaired. Of course. It was just instantly helped. So yeah, I kind of now use it in everything because I've trialed it in sport, and then it's worked there. And yeah, I just find it so useful. So I come up with loads of 3-word phrases. Like,
so it chins you out of the kind of inner self-talk and into the reality of, hey, look, I'm dealing with a real impairment here. This is par for the course. This is just life. Let's get on with it. Type thing. So really powerful. So there's 2 examples there. Tell me, I personally felt like the Paralympics took on a different meaning and a different status around the time of the 2012 Olympic Games. That it was this moment, certainly in my life, where I really recognized that the Paralympics wasn't kind of the also Olympics, the other Olympics that happens 2 weeks later. It was actually every bit, if not more, inspiring. It was world records being broken, as well as overcoming all sorts of obstacles, and like just incredibly inspiring story after inspiring story. And in many ways, the Olympics, you've got people who have won the genetic lottery in terms of their height, their strength, their body. And you can look at them and you can kind of go, well, that's great, but there's not a lot to learn if you're not 6'6", in there. Whereas when I was watching the Paralympics, it's like, wow, these are situations where people are massively overcoming adversity and showing the world how it's done. Is that true that actually, is that in my head that took a new status, or Or is that actually something that happened where the 2012 Olympic Games kind of set a new tone?
Yeah, I mean, so in the run up to the games, you know, it's a really interesting thing when you're competing in the Paralympics. As you say, the Olympics happened 2 weeks prior to it. So we're in our what's known as the holding camp beforehand. It's like a training camp that we were on. We were in Wales actually, and we were watching the guys racing in the Olympics, and you see these immense crowds, and the hype was just unreal. I mean, the atmosphere around the whole country was superb, and I just kind of was saying to other people, thinking to myself, if we just have half of that, the Paralympics are going to be incredible, and it'll be something memorable. But we turned up and heard that the ticket sales had gone incredibly well. Everything was selling out, and that was really exciting. It was interesting though, even the coverage on TV in the run up to the opening ceremony. It was kind of the usual sob story. Oh, I've gone through all these problems, but I've made it to the Paralympics. And it was nice stories. But then the competition started at day one, and people realized that, wow, these are phenomenal athletes. And, this is something special. And this is just sport. It's just playing out phenomenally well. And as you say, there was that extra level of interest. Like, you can almost associate it to as a normal person, that you're seeing someone who's missing a limb, who's running way quicker than you ever could. And it's just mind blowing. My favorite event to ever watch is guys with one leg who are high jumping and jumping ridiculously high. And you just think, I mean, that's just surreal.
Yeah.
And, being part of that, and suddenly the hype, and actually the whole country just fell in love with it. All the stadiums did fill out. And then just people who were coming along to the park in London just to sit around and watch the big screens. There were more people at the Paralympics than there were at the Olympics. It was unbelievable. And everyone was talking about it. Everyone was loving it, and was loving it for sport. And to be part of that was just phenomenal. And for me, it was my goal, as we said, to just make it to that start line. And I turned up as not just a guy who was going to be competing, but as a real medal contender, which was phenomenal. And I mean, the atmosphere in the velodrome sold out. It only seats 6,000. It's just the nature of the velodrome. It's quite a tight environment. But because of the shape of the building, it was the Pringle in London, that one has got the kind of sloped roof. It looks like the Pringle crisps. Then it just sort of channeled all the noise down onto the track where we were racing.
What was it like for you?
It's so hard to put it into words almost, but you walk up onto the track, your name is announced, and the whole stadium goes ballistic. And literally, you cannot hear anything. It's beyond rock concert loud. And we were like rock stars. It was just mind blowing. And at that point,
were you the world record holder?
I was, but I wasn't favorite to win. We held the world record, but we'd actually lost the world championships earlier that year to our teammates, and they were probably considered the favorites. So I was pretty nervous. I kind of thought, we're probably in with a really good shot of winning a medal, but silver is probably likely. So we got up on the track, and as I say, this huge roar, and you realize the sudden expectation on your shoulders.
Did that knock you out of your zone, or did it put you in your zone?
I had prepared for it to a degree. I'd come down. We were the second or third day of racing. I'd gone down to the velodrome during another day just to feel the atmosphere, feel the noise. But when it's you, it's obviously different. And I'd planned to be very focused and not take it in, but obviously you hear your name, you hear a roar, and I started grinning. It's like, wow, this is a moment to remember. And then you have to quickly think, okay, yeah, a race. We've got to do a race now. So, I think for some people it did knock them off their stride. Home games can have that kind of effect of being phenomenally important to your performance, or it can knock it. I guess I didn't really know the techniques I now know, and maybe I lucked out a bit that I just made the most of it. And the race itself, we got off to an incredible start. Again, this was 4 laps of the track. And often when you're in a race, you've got those stupid helmets, the aero helmets on. You're very enclosed, like in this sort of little bubble where you're at max exertion, and your other senses start to shut down. So I don't really hear anything usually in a race. But as we came around to start the final lap, which is where the fatigue really hits you, like the lactic acid burning in your legs is huge, and the bike's decelerating, and it's often the person who decelerates least who ends up winning. I just became aware of a huge roar just as we crossed the line, and it just kind of inspired me to find that extra few percent again and really dig in and just find something more. And that last lap just seemed to float by so quickly, so much more than normal. And again, we crossed the line, and that awareness just came back to silence when we first crossed the line. And then again, 3 words as clear as day, new world record. And then just this huge eruption of noise. And that moment is just, I mean, that'll never, ever go away. You know, it's just incredible. And if anyone watches the video back ever of my celebrations, the instant I hear those words, it's just beyond over the top. You know, it's just a huge release of just all that emotion. And yeah, I stood on top of that podium and
collected that gold medal.
Yeah, and to come from those Beijing Games where, you know, I was just proud to make it and become a Paralympian, to suddenly being a home games Paralympic champion, breaking a world record in the process.
London 2012, wow, and world record and gold medal. So here's the thing that I kind of gets me in my mind. I can only imagine that if you achieve that such a peak thing, that almost everything after that moment, like how does anything in life live up to that moment? What is it like being a mere mortal, having experienced godly status, and then, you know, having to go and buy your groceries at Tesco every now and then and do very normal human things?
Yeah, I mean, the first 2 weeks afterwards were insane. I mean, the hype was still huge. We had the parade through London where over 1 million people came out. There were events all over the place, you know, winning awards and everything. It was just ridiculous. And it kind of kept that hype going for a while. But inevitably that eventually goes away and you are back to normal life. And it can be quite tricky to refocus. You know, I was very fortunate. I had a nice shiny medal I could go and look at that would cheer me up. But the interesting thing with sport, and I'm sure this is often the case in business, when you complete a project, and even if it's gone incredibly well, the next thought is, well, what do we do now? And that's very much the case in sport. So I came back into the velodrome after a month or so off, just kind of letting myself recover, both mentally and physically. And all the logos on the wall had changed from, I can't remember what the slogan was, it was something to London, and they'd all changed to Road to Rio. I was like, oh man, that's done. And now we've got to go and do it again. And inevitably, because sport moves forward, you know you're not just going to have to do it again, but you're going to have to do it again much faster if you're going to win again, because, you know, F1's suddenly chasing your world record and you know it's going to go. But, you know, I was fortunate I had the home Commonwealth Games in 2014 in Glasgow 2 years after that. So that was a big focus, another chance to race in front of a home crowd. But I find myself throughout my cycling career constantly chasing these high adrenaline moments to try and match up to it. And you know, they are few and far between, sadly, but they are so incredible. And that's something I need to try and fill as a whole once my cycling career is done, is how you replicate those moments.
The hard thing with being an athlete is eventually, unfortunately, the body does hit a point where you just can't compete with younger, fitter athletes. And you have to transition. And you talk about transitioning to the world of business and entrepreneurship and leadership. And you're doing that incredibly successfully by transitioning already some of the learnings from sport into executive performance, business performance. Can we finish up by just talking about some of the key things that you've learned that you feel are universal, that apply to anyone who's running a great business?
Yeah, and there are so many crossovers, and we've spoken about a couple here already, but the crossovers between business and sport are huge. You know, it's a competitive environment where things are constantly evolving and people are making progress, things are moving forwards, and new ideas and innovations are coming in all the time. And it's this constant battle to get your head above the crowd and just get noticed. And you know, for me, that's getting on the team. And then how do you make the next step in performance to get onto the podium and then become a winner? And then ultimately, how do you stay on top of the podium at the top of whatever industry you might be for X amount of years. I mean, that's a real challenge in keeping that longevity to it. And I think there are huge crossovers in sport. And, you know, I've realized looking back at my career that I picked up all these skills through talking to other athletes, talking to specialists, and just things I've kind of trialed and evolved over time that I think really do benefit people in business. And the first one we spoke about was having that motivation, that desire, that thing that really inspires you to perform every single day. Because motivation does come and go, and you know, those days when you're not feeling it, you've got to have something that inspires you to perform if you want to challenge. So a real key point is finding your motivation. What is it? And that's something I kind of delve into in the book a bit. And then we look at the kind of the nuts and bolts about how you strategize for success. So every we talked about at the end of a cycle, you look towards the next Olympic cycle. So your next main event is 4 years down the line. And I love these 4-year cycles. You plan for a big event 4 years ahead and almost work back from, we need to achieve this goal in 4 years. Well, what do I need to do today in order to get there to this almost seemingly unachievable target? How do we set goals? How do we set an environment for success? And
that alone is actually quite an extraordinary thing that a lot of people miss in business, that, you know, having a 4-year goal that's so clear. I mean, a lot of businesses are criticized for going from quarter to quarter, and all they're doing is thinking about 90-day cycles. A lot of businesses are rudderless, and they're just kind of like more of the same, and they're just forward engineering the past, not reverse engineering some sort of inspiring future. And then the opposite can happen, which is some businesses are so pie in the sky that they've got a moonshot that's never going to happen. And there's never any time to celebrate, because essentially you don't ever celebrate because the goal of the company is so unachievable, and there's no deadline or anything like that. So it's actually quite exciting to hear you say about picking something 4 years out, that time frame of 4 years, and saying, all right, we're going to work backwards from some really exciting, you know, world record. Like almost we're going to set a world record in 4 years from now and work backwards from it. That's a directly powerful idea that anyone in business could adapt.
Yeah, and it's that great kind of time scale that it's somewhere far enough ahead that you can make these big gains without it being too unrealistic and too big a thing. But I think that one of the real things I've noticed within business is the vast majority aren't really tracking their own performance ever, which is something that's huge in sport. I mean, you think particularly Formula One, with the amount of telemetry coming in, that all these data points we're collecting, and the vast majority aren't tracking performance and literally don't really know how well they're doing and how far along the journey they are in order to actually achieve that goal. And that's something that we've definitely developed in sport, is we find measurables everywhere. And it helps with that mindset as well, that it almost gamifies your success, where you can see this progress bar almost building up as you go, that you might see in a computer game where you're getting to the next level.
In business, there's no excuse in 2020. In business, there's so many things you can measure so effortlessly. You know, we've got a number of dashboards ourselves that kind of update automatically. And we can see, you know, for example, we've got a laps dashboard, a very good one for you, right? But leads, appointments, presentations, and sales is what it stands for us. We literally can hit refresh on the browser and see, you know, an update minute to minute, how many leads have been generated, appointments have been set, presentations have been delivered, and sales have been made. So we have. How
good do you feel when you see those numbers are good, and you know, it gives you that motivation you're doing the right thing as well? That must be great for you.
The way it displays on our screen is we can see up to 100 weeks in the past, and we have a rolling 100-week average. So we can actually see how far above our 100-week average we are, and you can kind of, you know, gauge very quickly that you're making progress, which is lovely.
Yeah, exactly. And I think so many are missing out on that, and it's something that is so important. I mean, you don't learn lessons without seeing where you're making mistakes, and that's the other side to it. And you know, being able to redefine failures, I found, is the most important part in sport. That I think some industries are good at this, others are not, where you see failure as very much this negative thing, this negative connotation. I mean, the word does kind of have those sort of feelings. You say a failure is such a bad thing, but in sport, we fail all the time. You lose races. I fail to lift weights in the gym. I fail to hit targets that I set myself. But that's this incredible opportunity for me to see, right, well, this is where I'm currently at, and this is where I want to be. Right? What can I do then to make that next step? And, or, if something went wrong in a race, we analyze it, we look at why and think, well, we're not going to make that mistake again next time. We can put things right. And I think that ability to redefine how you see failure and actually seek it out rather than trying to avoid it is probably the biggest thing that really helped me in sport to develop. I think in my early career, I was one of those who shied away from mistakes. I didn't like my coaches watching me doing training sessions. So if I was struggling, I could almost hide and they'd never know. And just opening up and
so in many ways you can redefine the business culture to reframe failure. I'm trying to do this very early on with my son. He's 5 years old, just learning how to ride without stabilizers. And we have a mantra that we say over and over and over again while he's learning, which is mistakes are part of learning, learning's part of winning, and every winner was once a beginner. And we say this over and over and over, and it's so cool because when he has a slip up with his bike, he says mistakes are part of learning, and it's just cool to see that software is getting installed from a very early age. And I know that with our company culture, we really want people to make mistakes, because if we're not making mistakes, we're not trying anything different or anything new.
Completely agree. That's awesome to hear as well. And what I also love about your little mantra there is that it comes in 3 nice little sections, Dan, which, as we all know, is memorable and catches your imagination. So that is good. You've got it nailed.
Oh, I'm a good coach. I can. I'll come on down to Team GB when I have a spare moment. I'm sure I'll be welcome.
Anytime.
But mate, that's been wonderful catching up with you. I want to say to anyone listening, the book is brilliant. I know a lot of executives, entrepreneurs are into cycling. If you're into cycling and business, you're going to absolutely love this book, because it basically brings together the 2 passions of cycling. But also, the thing I love about your book is you really spell out the lessons. You don't leave it to the imagination. At the end of every short chapter, there is a very clear, this is the lesson. This is something you can get out of this. And it makes you ponder on the story. For me, I found myself reading a chapter and enjoying it, then reading the way you summarize the lesson, and then reflecting on that story again and going, okay, I really see all the points that were coming across in that story. It follows a great cadence and contains so much wisdom. I think that a lot of people are going to love this book, mainly because there are so many entrepreneurs who are into cycling. I think you've got yourself an incredible niche there between those two things.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. It's I never saw myself writing a book, and it's incredible to get those ideas down on paper, really. And the feedback I've been getting already has been amazing. I actually had a guy contact me just the other day who said he's just finished a series of 6 months of cancer treatment, and he's using the lessons learned to kind of get his life back on track after that, which was just like, it made me so happy, to hear. Just unexpected that people from all aspects are able to kind of link in and find lessons from it. So yeah, anyone who's a cycling fan, I'm sure will love it. There's plenty of stories in there, and I'm also happy to laugh at myself in the book. So I think there's a lot of humility there too. I don't hold anything back.
It's lovely to hear what was going on in your head in some of those stories, which is great. But you've been through the Dent Accelerator, the Key Person of Influence Accelerator. You've also been through Team GB and the preparation for the Olympics. So you, of all people, know what a high performance environment is like. How do we at Dent, how do we do as a high performance environment? How was it for you going through the accelerator?
So it's the first place, the accelerator, that I've been to where I got that same feeling as being around athletes who were so determined to be the best at what they did. That environment of pushing each other and getting the most of each other. And as athletes, we're competitive with one another, but we also want each other to succeed. And I felt the same thing happened when I entered the accelerator, and I didn't know what to expect, if I'm honest. And in a business sense, I almost fell out of my depth. But just being around all these positive people who are out there to make the most of themselves was so uplifting, and I learned so much. And any days again when I was struggling a bit with it, I knew I could just kind of call on one of the people I met, whether it's in an accountability group or just one of the other members, to kind of put me back on track again. And that was so exciting. And yeah, I mean, it's almost similar to sport in that it pushes you to that level where you do have to go all in, and which I love, and I think most people do love it. You want to be pushed, and yeah, you almost can't fail to improve as a result. So for me, it was just that world away from cycling, but I had it again. It was just, I fell in love with it, which is why I'm speaking to you now, I guess, you know.
Thank you very much. It's been so wonderful having you on the podcast. It's been brilliant working with you on the Dent Accelerator, and now actually having you as one of the Dent coaches. It's incredible for us as an organization to have someone of your caliber working alongside us as a Dent coach, and actually doing some of the work as a Dent coach. So, you know, I never knew that when we started doing the work with you, but it's a perfect fit that you've now, you know, lent yourself to this environment in a coaching space as well. And I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. No, thank you for having me on, and I can't wait to work with you guys again in the future. It's exciting times coming up.